Okay, so good morning, Shavua Tov, and we are Baruch Hashem back to our learning about the giants of Torah, about Gdolei Israel. We are already, we can say, in the last generation, I think. So in the last generation, uh, unfortunately, we won't be able to go for long this summer because in 3 weeks I am out for Miluim. And so we can have the shiur this week, Bez Hashem the shiur next week, and hopefully the shiur in the week after, although I would have to, that would have to see. And then we will see.
To buy all the books to
And
read that we can get a chance to read for them.
and yeah, exactly. So that's as the plans for the very near future here in Israel. Anything planned farther than near future is basically it's prophecy.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Okay, so second, this is our second part about Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. I would have a quick recap of what we did it was already a month ago. And then, yeah, it's time fly when you enjoy, I guess. And then we will continue. So Rav Yitzchak Herzog was born in 1888 in Lumże in Poland to a rabbinical, distinguished family. His father, Rav Yoel, was a Talmid Chacham, brilliant, famous, and a member of the Mizrahi. And in a very young age, the young Yitzchak also is being acknowledged as a young genius. In 1897, the father of Yoel is being appointed as the Rav of Worcester in Massachusetts, but then he doesn't succeed. He goes back to England, to Leeds, where they stay for a decade and a half. At that time, young Rav Yitzchak is being ordained, is sending letters all over Europe to Rabbanim, getting their answer, because there are not so many Torah scholars he can speak with in Leeds. I apologize for Leeds natives here, but he feels the need to speak with other Rabbanim in other places, and he is being ordained. Also, later, he is being given an MA from London University in languages, in Semitic and classic languages. Then his father is being appointed to the Rav of Paris, no, to a specific community of the more Haredi community, Jewish community of Paris. And Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac goes with him and he gets his PhD. Excuse me, he continues his secular studies in the Sorbonne, but the PhD is from London University. He goes back to London in order to get his PhD. And the PhD was about the Tchelet. Remember, we spoke about that, and that also reveals his interest, or maybe even we can say belief, that the world is coming towards a Mashiach. So old ancient mitzvot that were forgotten, such as the Tchelet, can be now maybe revealed. Also, he has, if we try to describe his personality, three important traits. One is his genius in Torah. The second is his attraction to science, both what we call the human science, but also the real science, such as chemistry. And the third, as we said, is aspiration for renewing Am Yisrael, for Geula, for redemption. In 1915, he's being appointed as the Rav of Belfast in Ireland. He is also he's a member of the Mizrahi. He's heading the Mizrahi. He's establishing the Mizrahi in Ireland. He's also a friend of the movement for the freedom of Ireland. We spoke about all of that. Again, we are doing now a very quick rehearse. In 1935, he's getting married, and in 1935, his father passes away. He buries him in Eretz Israel, and then he meets Rav Kook and other important Rabbanim here in Eretz Israel. And 2 years later, he comes already as the Rav Rashi, is appointed, Rav Kook passed away, and he is being appointed as the Rav Rashi in the very heated years of 1938, 1939, with the Arab Revolt, with the uprising of the Jews against the British mandate. He is taking a careful but active role. Careful in the sense that he's not radical, but an active in the sense that he speaks out, he goes to meet Jewish and world leaders. He's being asked by the British to speak in front of the different committees that the British were establishing from time to time in order, A, to decide what to do, and B, to delay the doing. So that's what is beautiful about a committee, right? You appoint it, and then you can have 2 or 3 years in which it's being debated, and when they would finally come to some conclusion, the conclusion is already irrelevant, and then you can have a new committee, and that's it's I don't think it's an invention of the British, but obviously they took it to mastery. Yes, so that's I think, and also that's an inheritance that we got from them here in Israel. That's something for a different shiur. Okay. Is also trying very, very strongly to unite the different Jewish factions, the revisionists, the Etzel, the Lehi, the Haganah. He succeeds to a certain degree, but try you to unite all of the Jews. No, that's not an easy task. Again, we are surfing very, very quickly. In September of 1939, the Second World War breaks out, and he is doing his best to rescue. I think it can be said, almost without exaggeration, that taking out the parachuters, Hannah Senesh and their friends, he is maybe it's not Israel, it's a Palestine citizen who is doing the most in order to save Jews. He's wandering all over the Western world, in England, in the US. He meets with Roosevelt. He's doing his best in order to try and convince them to intervene and save the Jews. But as we know, most of these attempts are in the end for vain. He is in 1941, after 2 years of traveling abroad trying to convince world leaders to intervene for the sake of the Jews, is returning to Eretz Israel. Now in 1941, that's Rommel is in the front and is conquering all of North Africa, and he is in his way to Eretz Israel. So he's being warned by the Americans, don't go back to Israel. A, the roads are extremely dangerous. Sailing in the Mediterranean is extremely dangerous. And B, you may find yourself in a conquered or immediately conquered country by the Nazis. So stay here, we'd issue you a visa and go back to Eretz Israel when it is safe. And the answer of Herzog is, I have a belief that there was a first destruction, there was a second destruction, but there would not be a third destruction. And that's what he says. He says it out aloud. He says it to Lord Halifax, who speaks to him, and he says it to the Jewish crowd that is trying to convince him to stay. And he comes back. He's not able to find a ship. There's no ship that will take him, because no one wants to sail, as I say, in the Mediterranean. So he has to go through Mozambique and through Africa, and many, many stories there. Again, we don't have the time. And in the end, he's able to come in Beshalom to Eretz Israel. All of these are very, very nice stories, but what he really wanted to do is to save as many Jews that he could. And there were a few Jews that he was able, from time to time, he was able to take from one camp to another in that direction. But the conclusion is not good. He's not even able to recruit funds. He thought that he would be able to raise funds in the US for the sake of saving Jews, and even that he failed miserably. He was not able to raise the funds that he wanted to raise. and he comes back. He's very disappointed, but it is what it is. And after the end of the war, he is trying to rescue. He goes again to a tour now in Europe, and he's trying to rescue as many Jews as he can. In the end of last year, I told the story, the famous story, maybe a legend, but the famous story about the Shema Israel, by which he was able to identify the children that were hidden in the monastery. And we know that at least 500 children were saved by his own personal efforts. At least 500.
On Yom HaShoah this past week at Or Torah, the fourth graders put on a production acting out that.
Beautiful. Because he is the figure of the Chemed. That's right. It makes sense. Yeah, so at least 500 children. Excuse me? This was after. Yeah, this was after. He met with the Pope, he wanted the Pope to give a psak halacha, right? That all the monasteries have to release the Jewish children that they have, and you may not be surprised that the Pope had I can't even remember, he had a very mefulpal reason why he's not able to do so. But after he had been quiet throughout all of the Holocaust itself, then being quiet afterward, that's not a surprise at all. No. So that's okay. He was. And that's how we ended the shiur last time that we spoke. And now I would like to focus our shiur on the years before and immediately following the establishment of Medinat Israel. There's also a shiur on preparation for Yom HaAtzmaut. And Rav Herzog was a very central figure in the establishment of the chief rabbinate of Medinat Israel and in the preparations for and later the realization of the Jewish figure, we may say, of Medinat Israel. Do you want to raise the temperature a little?
Yeah.
No?
Did I give a hint?
אוקיי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. Okay. So in the years just before the establishment of Medinat Israel, he is traveling a lot. He is the chief rabbi. The British appointed him as the chief rabbi of Palestine, and he is doing his best in order to make connections with all type of Jews. And as always, there would always be people to the right, to the extreme right, that just being a doctor rabbi would be enough for them to not speak with him. There are people in the far left, that just being a Dr. Rabbi is enough for them to not speak with him. So obviously there were people that he was not able to make any bridge to them, but it's not for his lack of trying. And he's going around, he's speaking with the Chalutzim, speaking with others, and he's telling them, you are doing the most wonderful service to the Jewish people by building the Jewish state, but on your other hand, if you do not connect it to its tradition, then you plant a tree, but you don't leave its roots. The roots of the Jews are the tradition. That's the way they would take hold in the sacred ground, in Admat HaKodesh of Eretz Israel. And if you are not following tradition, you are putting the tree, but you do not let it leave. You do not let it take root. That's his basic message. Again, to what extent was it successful? To a certain extent, to those that were somewhat open to listen. But we have to remember that back then the culture war was extremely strong. Now we think that nowadays it's a culture war, but nowadays it's different. It's much more politicized. It's much more personal than what it was then. Then it was extremely ideological. There are positives and negatives to each type of a war or a struggle. Maybe it's better say struggle. It's a better word. Okay, in 1945, in Gush Etzion, the nascent Gush Etzion, which only took hold on the ground in 1943. By the way, as a part of that was an inspiration they took from the Warsaw ghetto. revolt. So they go on the ground in 1943, and in 1945 they establish a kibbutz named Mesuot Yitzchak, named after Rav Yitzchak Halevi Herzog in his life. And he was very he was very happy, very moved by this gesture, and he liked to visit in Mesuot Yitzchak and to relax there. Also later, after, as you may know, Yom HaZikaron, Daled Iyar, was established in the day that Gush Etzion fell. And with the death of 120 something defenders of the Gush, after the Georgians and the local Arabs were able to conquer the Gush, then everyone that surrendered, you wouldn't be surprised, but they murdered everyone that was there. Luckily, Baruch Hashem, it's not a luck, it's because they were smart enough, they moved the children and the women out from the Gush before. Now, after it was after the 48 war, after מלחמת העצמאות, מסעות יצחק was re-established in Shafir, that is north of Ashkelon, and Rav Herzog again would come to there from time to time to visit the Yishuv named after him. But I want to still speak about when these settlements are in Gush Etzion, because they are under siege. The only open way is to Yerushalayim, and it's not really open. And the British were not really good, or not really interested, or not really willing to defend the Jews. They had their own cheshbon. The cheshbon, it's very simple. You don't have to be the cheshbon was the Arabs hold oil, and the Jews hold basically nothing. And B, the Jews are anyway in their pocket. Because who would the Jew ally with? They have to go with the West, what we would call today the Western world. So they are anyway in our pocket. So who do we need to pacify? Who may go with Russia or with the Eastern world? The Arabs. So it is better for us to show our goodwill to the Arabs than just realpolitism. That's how the world is. So the British do not really try to defend the Jews in a honest measure. So the road is more closed than open, and we may remember the Shayeret Alamed Hey, the 35 soldiers that were sent in order to help Gush Etzion, and they were again. The story is it's a legend, the real story, who knows? But the story is that they tried to go undetected. However, in the way they met a local roe, a shepherd, an old shepherd, and they caught him, and they didn't want just to kill him. So he promised them that he would not let their whereabouts known. So they let him go, and he immediately, of course, went to his village and alarmed the Arabs. So the Arabs put roadblocks in the path of the 35. They tried to bypass it, but in the end, there were many more Arabs than 35. So it was in the minute that they were caught on the way, then the story was already over. And they were killed there. It's a heroic story because they later found it took days before the British were able to secure even the removal of the bodies. When they found the bodies, then they still held the last ones were still holding rocks, stones in their hands, because after they were out of ammunition, then they used whatever they were able to use. The bodies were mutilated, as the minhag here in the Middle East, as you can imagine. Okay, so that's just to take us into the atmosphere of what does it mean. And Rav Herzog receives questions because he's the chief rabbi, so he receives questions from Gush Etzion and other places about what is allowed and what is not allowed to do during war. Because we have to remember, the Jews did not wage war as an entity. Jews as soldiers in other armies That was very common in some places, in some areas. But the Jews fighting as Jews, that didn't happen from Bar Kokhba to 1948. So we have around of 1,800 years in which there is no development in the halachic area of war. And many questions. Now you can try to rely on we have some sources. Rambam did codify the laws of war, but even if Rambam would have known the war was in his days, that was medieval war. Now we have modern days war, and we have such a gap. So the questions were piling, and it was very difficult to give sourced answers. And Rav Herzog was the one that was tasked in the end with this mission, because he was the chief rabbi. And when you read his answers, his responsa, which was, there are 13 volumes, that's only one of them. So when you read the answers, you can also see the development in his thought, meaning that the answers he gave in 46 or in 47 are not similar to those that he gave in 48, and especially not in 49 after the establishment of the state, or 52. So you see how he develops his thought. Many of his rulings are being held to same capacity to this day. Others, as we'll see, have, as I said, the thought has developed, and we've changed some of the practice. Some were not practical, even I think, as they were given, and especially not after. We don't have the time, obviously, to read many responses, but I did hope that you'd be able to read at least some of it, because it's written in very clear Hebrew, very lucid. If you can please pass them around. We'll also share it in the Zoom. It is vanilla flavored or something?
Yeah. זה מה שאני חייבת
No, חס וחלילה. I don't complain about what I get for free, but that's... When you're not prepared to that, it's an interesting surprise. Okay. So that's the first response in source Aleph. You see the question is from Kfar Etzion. See the date. Kaf Aleph Shvat Tafshin So Shvat. These are 2 months. The first source Aleph. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just a second. Here. That's okay. So the first source, you can see it's from the question is from Kfar Etzion, Kaf Aleph Shvat. So we are 2 months, no, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar. 3 months or 2.5 months before the proclamation of the Jewish state. But in Dalet Be'Iyar, there would be no Gush Etzion anymore. So this is 2 months before the fall of Gush Etzion, and they send a letter, Pniimי וסודי, it's an internal and secret letter, you'd see in a minute why, לכבוד הרבנות הראשית לארץ ישראל בירושלים. So to the chief rabbinate of Eretz Israel in Yerushalayim, למעלת כבוד תורת הרבנים הראשיים, שלום ויקר, so שלום to the רבנים ראשיים, chief rabbis, הננו פונים בזה במספר שאלות, you have a few questions, אשר התעוררו אצלנו בזמן האחרון, which did rise in the recent days, עקב תנאי השעה הנוכחית, because of the conditions. So we are already in the middle of what would be later known as מלחמת העצמאות, that's before the proclamation. So they don't see it yet as מלחמת העצמאות. For them, it's just a long line of events beginning in 1936, or if you want, beginning in 1880, of the Arabs damaging, harming, killing, murdering, terrorizing, or any other word that you want, the Jewish settlers. We would like clear instructions. למען נדע איך להתנהג. We need clear instructions to know how to behave. היות וקשרינו עם העיר הם מקריים וקששים מאוד. Our connections with the city became difficult and random. We can never know when would come the next dispatch, the next convoy. אי אפשר לכוון את סט השיירות אלינו בימים הרצויים לנו. We cannot decide, we cannot just set the convoys in a certain day. אלא יש לנצל כל הזדמנות אפשרית הנראית כרצויה מבחינת הביטחון. We have informants, we have other ways, we try to establish when is the safe time, and then we go out. So what happens, כבר קרה כמה פעמים מספר, כי שיירות הגיעו אלינו ביום השבת, והן צריכות באותו היום לחזור העירה. So the convoy goes out from ירושלים, obviously not from Gilo, there is no Gilo, and there is no Talpiot, and there is no nothing. So it was coming out of Beit Vagan. That was the no Yerushalayim. So the journey begins from Beit Vagan all the way to גוש עציון. קרה פעמים מספר, שיירות הגיעו ביום השבת, and they need to come back on שבת. בקשר לזאת התעוררו אצלנו מספר שאלות. Now we have a few questions. On Shabbat. Now, it's not fighting. Fighting, it would be pretty easy. You would say, okay, obviously it's a pikuach nefesh, so it's mutar. But here we speak about getting supplies. Mutar or not. Now, it may be that for us, 77 years later, we have an established practices. But for them, the whole thing is very new. So, see the questions. איך לנהוג בפריקת המסעות מהמכוניות? Can we unload the supplies? We have problems of carrying, maybe muktzeh, maybe reshut lereshut, with different halachic problems. So are we allowed to do so? המותר לנו להחזיר במכוניות חביות לדלק וכלי אריזה שונים אשר בלעדם קשה יהיה להשיג בעיר דלק או אספקה. That's amazing. We don't have enough oil containers. So we must give back the empty ones. Otherwise, they won't be able to send us next time oil. Are we allowed to do so on Shabbat? Because that is for the sake of Tuesday or Wednesday, or who knows, maybe 2 weeks from now. Third, האם מותר לנו לחלק בשבת את המכתבים אשר הובאו בשבת על ידי יהודים? בהתחשב כי לפעמים עובר שבוע ימים ויותר, וחבר אינו מקבל מכתב מבני ביתו הנמצאים בחוץ. An amazing question. You remember the women and the children are already evacuated. Letters are coming. Now, they bring the letters whenever they come. When the convoy comes, the letters come. Now, this is not part of the war effort. Are you allowed to give these letters on Shabbat? Everyone is waiting to hear. No phones. No nothing. Are you allowed to give this letter? They know the letter came. Should they wait to Motzei Shabbat? Or am I allowed to open the letter and read the letter that came from my wife? So these are questions that were not asked. These are not simple questions in any way or means. Again, the fourth question, excuse me. מותר לחברי המזכירות לפתוח ולטפל בשבת במכתבים הנשלחים מחברינו בעיר ובהם עניינים דחופים של אספקה והגנה. So letters come not only as on personal matters but also on the war. Are we allowed to read, and are we allowed to write back on Shabbat? Again, I'm skipping here because obviously we won't have the time to read all the answers. The questions are fascinating. מה דינם של בגדים וחפצים אשר נשותינו וילדינו השאירו והם מבקשות להעביר באופן דחוף מפאת המחסור? The child left and some of the games, some of the clothes stayed behind. Are we allowed on Shabbat to give these things so they would be able to bring them back to the families? Now you may say, that's not a pikuach nefesh, it's not even close to pikuach nefesh. The child is waiting for his teddy bear. Is it a simple question? It's not a simple question. Because sometimes the ability of them, I am projecting words to his mouth, I apologize. But I think just to share, I think what I see as the considerations, sometimes the ability of the mother to survive depends on the question, did the child got his game, his toy? That's just, again, you are fathers and mothers, you know that. You know that. So what seems to be completely unnecessary on Shabbat is not unnecessary at all. And then the ninth question is not about a convoy, but it's about they need a landing site for planes. They had a few planes, couple of planes on מלחמת העצמאות. And they need them in order to be able to move. That was not for aspaka, for supplies, because the planes were not strong enough to carry too much. But sometimes you had someone that was injured, and you wanted to be able to get him to Jerusalem, to the hospital, as quick as you can. For that, they would use the landing site. But the landing site needs to be prepared. Are you allowed to prepare it on Shabbat? So with the tractors and everything. That was the ninth question. And he says, אנו מקווים כי כבוד תורתנו הרבנים הראשיים יעיינו בכל שאלותינו ויודיענו ברורות על כל שאלותינו ובהקדם. We need the answers, we need them clear, we need them fast. כל הכבוד, דוב קנול. Dov Knoll was one of the founders of Etzion, who was also the father of Rav Eliashiv Knoll. You may have heard of him. He was one of the Rabbanim of Tzohar, a very famous Rav. He wrote a sefer that is used by, I think nowadays in our circles, that's the most common use for Taharat HaMishpacha, when they train, they teach the Chatanim and Kalot. It's called Ish Veisha. So it was niftar, unfortunately, he was niftar in a very young age of 60-something. He had cancer. But he was the Rav of Kfar Etzion, of the new Kfar Etzion. So he's the son of this Dov Knoll, and he became the Rav of that's I find it very, very moving. But that was Dov Knoll, his father. So the answer, Baruch Hashem, that's the answer of Rav Herzog. לאחינו היקרים, our dear brothers, אנשי כפר עציון, השם יגן עליכם. God would defend you, ולא יאונה לכם כל רע. No bad thing would happen to you, ותזכו לישועה שלמה במהרה. As we said, unfortunately, this prayer was not completely realized. התשובות לשאלותיכם יום כ"א שבט תש"ח. Now, we don't have yet the time to go through all of the detailed discussion, just very quick. א', במצב הנוכחי, הלא המסעות יש בהם משום פיקוח נפש. So the convoys and the supplies they bring is obviously a פיקוח נפש. If you wouldn't unload it, you may be in hunger, חס וחלילה, and who knows what would happen tomorrow, and it may be that many days would come before the next convoy would come. So obviously you are allowed to take off, and if you're allowed to take off, you're allowed also to upload. So all of these answers are solved under this discussion of pikuach nefesh. It's very important. The reason why I emphasize it now. But he says that it's a question of pikuach nefesh, and the pikuach nefesh would allow you to do, however, only things that obviously that are extremely and completely necessary. If you have to write in your left hand. And also about preparing the landing zone, the landing site, he says, maybe you can do it with two men. You know that a melacha that is done by two, it's more lenient a little than a melacha. So he says maybe two men can drive the tractor together. I don't know, I wonder if that is practical. But I guess he is trying to suggest to them whatever is able. Yeah, that'd be another pikuach nefesh maybe, exactly. And he finished again with a tefillah and bracha that God would defend them. So the answer, and we are 2 months before the declaration of the Jewish state, is based on pikuach nefesh. Now, let's go to an answer only very short time later, and you would see that he's already speaking in a different way. So the second source here, שאלות. Now these questions are being asked by Ezra. Ezra, the famous youth organization, they established, they had a gdud, a battalion in מלחמת העצמאות that was composed from yeshiva bachurim, and that was maybe the first Hesder unit. Of course, it was Hesder, but just as an idea, as a concept. So the whole gdud was religious. So they have questions to Rav Herzog. Now again, see I was blown by the questions. The first question is, המותר בשבת להתנדב לפעולות הגנה מסוימות, או אף מחויבים לעשות זאת? So the commander comes and he says, who would volunteer for a duty on Shabbat? So if I have to do something, then obviously I have to. But if he's asking for volunteers, on Shabbat, maybe I shouldn't volunteer. Because it's Shabbat, and you shouldn't volunteer yourself to do melacha. That's the first question. Again, for me, it's a foreign question. But that was a question that someone that is not anti-Zionism, this is someone that has volunteered to the Haganah to begin with. And he is asking questions, but real, sincere, halachic questions. Second, כנ"ל בדבר פעולות התקפה לשם הגנה. Let's say that you tell me that as a duty, as a guard, I must, because obviously we need guards. What about if the Haganah decided that we need to go on the attack on a certain village in order to prevent them from attacking us? That's not clear defined Haganah. That is an attack for the sake of Haganah. Is that allowed? Third question, כנ"ל בדבר פעולות התקפה גרידא. What if it's not even an attack in order to defend, it's an attack in order to conquer? The Haganah and later Tzahal were conquering areas that were designated, according to the decision of the UN, they were designated to the Arab state that was never established, at least till now, 77 years later, right? So I think we all know the history, and we know that the UN decided on a partition plan, and there was a huge chunk, larger than the chunk that was designated for the Jewish state. There was a huge chunk that was supposed to go to the Arab state. And early in the beginning, the leadership of the Jewish state, the Jewish settlement, agreed and accepted, with sorrow, but accepted the partition plan. But the Arabs, as we all know, never accepted it, and they decided they would throw all of the Jews to the sea. That's, I guess, those that would survive the attack itself. And Baruch Hashem, and with the help of God, we were able to overcome their attack. And then we went into attack. And we conquered areas that were designated for the Arab state. They didn't forgive us for that to this day. To this day. When they speak about the right of return, basically what they demand is back the areas in which they resided, in which they lived, the Arab villages, in which they lived up to 48. 67 is not the beginning of the war. 48 is also not the beginning of the war, but that's the beginning of the conquest of areas by the IDF. So are we allowed on Shabbat to go on the attack? That's not defense at all. Are we allowed to go on the attack? And here Rav Herzog begin and says, תשובות, ברוך השם, אור ליום ב', the date is כ"ה אדר ב'. So, the first question were from Shvat, and now we are in Adar Bet. These are 2 months later. And you would see the difference in the answers. לחברי ארגון עזרא, אחים חביבים, מברכם השם מציון, וראו בטוב ירושלים, so God would bless you, and you would see the best of ירושלים. First question. תוך ההנחה שמוכרחים לסמוך בחגון זה על המפקד. It says, we must rely on the commander. If he gave you, there is a mission. You cannot begin to decide what is needed and what is not needed. That does sound as a Jewish army. But no army can function if it is up to any soldier to decide if a certain act is allowed or not. There will be no end to it. So we must accept the authority. Again, for an army, it's very clear. It's ridiculous to have to say it. But Jews are not used to get any authority a part of Hashem. I'm speaking very, very honestly, a part of the authority of God. The Rav is only right as long as he, and that's correct, as he adheres to the orders of God, as they understood by the listeners. So they are not really accepting. I think I already quoted Rav Sachs here once or twice, that he said the problem with Jews, God says that Hashem Roi, right? That David says that God is the shepherd. So God is the shepherd, but the problem is that the Jewish were never lambs. He said that about the protocols of the elders of Zion. He says only Goyim can believe that the Jews can set up a meeting and agree on something. If they would ever come into a shul board meeting, they would know there is no way that Jewry is meeting in order to plan some coordinated something. And that's there is a lot of truth to it. There is a lot of truth to it, and you know these are yeshiva guys and the commander is giving a command, and I saw it with my own eyes, and they begin to discuss with him and to debate with him. Is that really necessary? Maybe we can go from the right, we can go from the left, we can do it with two people together. And I guess that there is no way you can perform military missions at that manner. So, says Rav Herzog, there must be a basic assumption. שמוכרחים לסמוך בחגון זה על המפקד. You must rely on the commander. שאם לא כן, אין לדבר סוד. There will be no end to it. ולא יהיה קיום לפעולות ההגנה בכלל. There would be no existence of defense at all if we do not rely on the judgment of the commander to what is needed and what is not needed. הלא יוצא שיש צורך חיוני והכרחי במספר אנשים מתוך היחידה שאליה המפקד פונה, ומתוך היסוד שמותר לחלל שבת לביצוע אותה פעולה אין מקום לשאלה זו. לשאלה זו היה מקום בצבא לא יהודי, והמפקד פונה בפקודה כזאת של היתר חילול שבת הוא רק מפני שהחייל היהודי אנוס. That's extremely important. This is, why did you ask the question? So here you see Rav Herzog working in a very analytical way. Say, you know why did you ask the question? Why did you have this idea even that you are not supposed to volunteer when the commander is asking for a certain duty on Shabbat? You know why did you ask the question? Because you are used to foreign armies. And there really as a soldier, you are uninterested in the whole project. I am a conscripted soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army. With all due respect to Franz Josef. And the Jews did have respect to Franz Josef. But with all due respect, I don't care about the result of the war. I care about one thing, that I will survive. So if I'm being given a duty, then that's a personal pikuach nefesh, and I would perform it. But if I am not given, I would not volunteer. There is no way I will volunteer for Franz Josef. The only Jews that were volunteering were in Germany. That's very interesting, in the First World War. And they were decorated. There were the percentage of Jews decorated in the First World War in Germany was higher than their percentage in the population. That didn't do them any good. So that was in foreign armies. But here, says Rav Herzog, and that is the first step, here we do not speak about the pikuach nefesh of the special soldier, the personal, individual. Here we speak about pikuach nefesh to Am Yisrael. If the commander deems it as necessary to go out to some mission, that's a mitzvah. You have to go. That's not a question. Volunteer. For volunteer. If chas v'chalila, you go here out on Shabbat and you see someone falling in the street, would you say, someone else can do it, so I should not be breaking the Shabbat? Chas v'chalila, if someone says something like that, that means that the Rav is not doing his work properly at all. Everyone must know that if someone is falling on Shabbat, you do not begin to wander looking for a goy or looking for a katan that would perform the chilul Shabbat. Chas v'chalila. Even if a goy would come, you should say to him, no, I want to do the mitzvah of saving this Jew's life. So that's the first principle. So says Rav Herzog, you must understand that we are now in a Jewish, not a state yet, but in a Jewish society, in a Jewish settlement, and we are saving the lives of Jews, not only of your life, of the soldier's life. Our mission is sacred, not only our survival. So that's the first step. And this step is not so different than what he said, of course, to the people of Gush Etzion. But then he goes on another step. And he says it here still in hesitation. And he says, I skip a few lines, בצבא העברי, שכולו ישראל, ההיתר לחלל שבת ולשם הגנה על ישראל. הרי אין מקום לשאלה זו. כשהותר לו לחלל שבת קודש, במקרה כזה לא משום שהוא אנוס, אלא משום הגנה על ישראל. So he says, as I said earlier, that here it's not only because we are forced, we are coerced, we are conscripted, but because we believe in the mission. But then he continues and says, in the second, turn the page, in the middle of the first line, ואם ההיתר מתבסס על רקע רחב יותר, it may be that here there is even a stronger reason that allows us and even demands of us to break the Shabbat. והיינו שזוהי מלחמת ישראל בארצו ומלחמת מצווה או חובה, וודאי שאין מקום לשאלה הזו. says Herzog here, it's not even only a pikuach nefesh. I mean, we can imagine, for that sake, that there would be Irgun Shomrim, right, in New York. Right? There is such an Irgun, I think, there is such an organization. And that they try to fight anti-Semitism, and they would be allowed to come with a gun to Shabbat, and Shabbat to Shul. I think that there are such innovations. And that's allowed. And the reason is not only in order to save my own life, but I act as a guard for the whole of the community. Herzog says, but that's only the beginning. These would only allow me actions of hatzalah, of saving, of defense. But when you speak about Eretz Israel, it's not only the hater does not rely only on the legal basis of pikuach nefesh, but also on defining the war as a milchemet mitzvah. This is a war we are commanded to wage. Conquering Eretz Israel, that's a mitzvah. Expanding the settlement of Jews in Eretz Israel, that's a mitzvah. So you are asking me about the difference between defense and attack. That's not necessarily a valid distinction. In Chutz La'aretz it may be valid, but not here in Eretz Israel. Here, the attack is also a mitzvah. And so says Rav Kook, says Rav Herzog, he quotes here Rav Kook, it says Rav Herzog, we have here a Jewish or nascent Jewish sovereignty. We have a Jewish entity. And you do not fight only for a community, only for one Jew, or not even for a community of Jews. You fight for Knesset Israel. And that is, again, for us, it may seem as simple. 77 years later. But we have to understand that's a bold step. Many Rabbanim did not agree with him at the time. Not necessarily not Zionistic, which obviously opposed the whole thing. They said the Jewish settlement in Eretz Israel, the secular Jewish settlement, is not a representative of Knesset Israel. But even Zionist rabbis, and most noticeably one of the major figures, maybe Bezos would speak about him, Rabbi Shulam Rat, a very important Rav. And he was very Zionistic. He was in the Moetzet HaRabbanut Harashit, sitting with Rav Herzog. And he said, what are you speaking about? We should discuss on the grounds of Pikuach Nefesh, but you have gone here way and beyond. And he said, yes, I am going way and beyond. And in the beginning, he says it hesitantly, and as time passes, he says, this must be the way that we walk. We need systematical thought here. We cannot depend anymore only on basis of local pikuach nefesh. Right? For example, and there he was also very hesitant, work of police. Now I'm going from army to police. And the Jewish state is being established, and the police comes, or this religious cops come to Rav Herzog and ask him, what are we allowed to do? Are we allowed to patrol on Shabbat? That's just a regular patrol. It's not that someone right here is being threatened. So if we would go by the regular laws of Pikuach Nefesh, that you need a Pikuach Nefesh in order to act, you only act after the thing, then what would be the outcome? That Shabbat would be the paradise for thieves and murderers, and everyone that would like to commit a crime would wait for Shabbat. That would be so. Obviously, you cannot solve it here on the basis of local acts. So in Chutz La'aretz, the non-Jews would work as the cops on Shabbat. Fine, you can do that. But here we are in Eretz Israel. Who do the work on Shabbat? The Arabs. So that's obviously that won't fly. So you must have Jewish cops working on Shabbat, even at times when there is no pikuach nefesh at sight. Why? Because maybe somewhere, by the way, there was a burglary. That's not pikuach nefesh. Is the cop allowed to act against burglary on Shabbat? So you may say, it may develop into a pikuach nefesh, and it may. What if the thief is already running away? Are you allowed to take the car and pursue after him? There is no pikuach nefesh involved at all. That's it. He's off. He's away. But again, if you won't allow it, Shabbat would become a day of hefker, anarchy. Now, Rav Herzog is Isurim. How do you say Isurim? He's torn by this question. Because he doesn't want just to give a blanket hater that would make the Shabbat into chol. in the police. On the other hand, he understands that he cannot go by the regular laws of pikuach nefesh because it won't work. You need a systematical answer. Now he has a few, again, looking back, I would say strange suggestions. He suggests maybe the cops can go by bikes and not by cars. And maybe they can, they have this joke about why the cops are going in couples, because one can write and one can read. So basically give the same advice. On Shabbat, they would go on couples and pairs. So they would be able to do the works together. Now we understand the weaknesses of this position, and many of these suggestions were not heeded for obvious reasons.
He wouldn't say don't join the police if you want to be shown.
No, he doesn't want to say that. Because he doesn't. He wants to give you a systematic, it's very important to him that a Jewish state can be established. If you say that an observant Jew cannot join the police, what you really say is there cannot be a Jewish state. A Jewish state can only operate if the policemen are goyim or non-observant Jews, which is something that the halacha does not accept. So the policemen should be goyim, the army should be goyim, maybe the government should also be goyim. So what are you left with? In what ways this state is Jewish? Our natural assumption, our Herzog's natural assumption, I would say also my assumption, I think every Zionistic Jew's natural assumption must be that if the Torah demands of us to be Mamlechet Kohanim Vegoy Kadosh, we should be a priestly kingdom, then we should be a kingdom. Being a kingdom means having an army, having a police. I don't know how David HaMelech conducted his police work. We don't have, at least that I know, any hints to that. But I am sure that they had something working out on Shabbat. Otherwise, you'd fall into anarchy. So something was going on. We do have from Sefer Maccabim, we have testimonies about that there was a debate to what extent are you allowed to fight on Shabbat. So that we know this discussion did take place. That's obviously we opened here a Pandora box. There is a lot to speak about. And our time is up. And I didn't even speak about one of Rav Herzog's main projects, which was to establish, he really hoped, maybe naively, that when the Jewish state would be established, then the leaders of the Yishuv would come to him or would come to the rabbinate, and ask for a Shulchan Aruch for the legal framework of the state. Now, he understood that Shabbat is not going to be observed, and we would not stone people that break the Shabbat, which also, anyhow, we cannot do halachically because we do not have the smicha. But Rav Herzog was thought that on monetary issues, we have our national law that we worked with throughout all of the Galut. So why won't it be adopted as the Jewish law? Why the British law on monetary issues is better than the Jewish law? Even not on religious grounds, on national pride grounds, it should have been taken as the framework of the Jewish state. And he worked extremely hard in order to codify the Jewish law into something that the modern Knesset can work with. Now, he was a legal expert. If you remember, he even was part of the forming of the constitution of the modern Ireland. So he was a real legal expert, and he worked very, very hard on that, and he was attacked from right and left. From left, he was attacked because they said, we do not want anything religious. Who knows what are you sneaking in? So no religion at all. We are free state, secular entity. Don't give us any of your halacha. That was from the left. And from the right, he was attacked because in order to modernize the ancient Jewish law, meaning you cannot come up and say, we know we are establishing the halachic courts, so women are pasul to give testimony, and goyim are pasul to give that. I mean, that wouldn't fly even 1 centimeter. The UN demanded, in order to be given the charter to establish a state, that it must be equal. There must be equal rights to everyone. And also people did want equal rights. So just as Jews, we wanted equal rights during our galut, we want to give equal rights, not to our enemies here, but people that wants to live here peacefully and quietly, we want to give them equal rights. But if we would establish the halacha in its immediate and plain meaning, then there would be no equal rights. According to the Rambam, anyone that is an idol worshipper is not even allowed, not only that he is not allowed to idol worship here in Eretz Israel, not even that he is not allowed to reside here. He is not allowed to make a connection flight on Atbag because he's not allowed to touch the ground if he's an idol worshipper. That's just the halacha of the Rambam. Obviously, again, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. So Rav Herzog made great concessions, that would be the word. And he said, you know, we have to accept that the only reason we can get the Jewish state is because the UN grants it to us. And they would only grant it to us if we would give equal rights. So it's a pikuach, and now it's a pikuach nefesh to have the Jewish state. So it's a pikuach nefesh. So according to that, according to halacha, giving equal rights is mutar and needed. And the inheritance, Yerusha, that was a great question. Because according to the Jewish law, only boys inherit. Would that become the law of the Israeli new state? So Ben Gurion told Rav Herzog that is one thing that would never work, and that in itself is enough for us not to accept halacha as the basis for the Jewish law. And Rav Herzog told him, I can solve that. We will do a special takana, rabbinical ordination, that would split the Yerusha share. Maybe there would be a certain thing that we would give only to the boys in order to keep something of the original halacha, but okay, it would be shared. And Ben Gurion told him, you know, if you would able to convince your friends in this law, we would accept the Jewish law. That's how the legend goes. And he gave him a certain date that if you give me that the Rabbanut has all of the Rabbanut has signed this ordination, Rav Herzog was not able to pass it.
Oh.
Was not able to pass it because people told him, why? You are destroying, you are reforming halacha. So people opposed, the Rabbanim opposed that. Now Rav Herzog wanted as I said, the Jewish secular courts to be Jewish courts. Now on the other hand, you need to give equal rights. So what he said was, we would accept judges that are not kosher according to halacha. So you'd have an Arab judge, and you have an unobservant judge. All of them are completely pasul according to halacha, sitting on a case and deciding according to the Shulchan Aruch. But that's Rav Herzog believed that it is better than having nothing. That was the final outcome. But it didn't fly. The Rabbanim told him, you're making a joke out of the halacha. Maybe some of them said, maybe it's better to have nothing than to misrepresent what Jewish law is. And Rav Herzog was extremely, extremely disappointed with his inability to convince the left was one thing, but his inability to convince his fellow Rabbanim that we need not just really a reform, but an adaptation to the modern state. He was extremely disappointed with that. But in the end, as we know, it completely didn't work. And other opinions were accepted. And basically, the opinion that was accepted is to have the Israeli law is completely secular. Even on monetary issues, and there is a system of rabbinical courts that if both sides want, they can accept upon themselves. But even that now is not sponsored by the state. So the state, that's Rav Herzog really wanted, that at least it would be acknowledged as an alternative that is sanctioned by the state, and even that did not work.
But in the area.
Yes, there it was accepted. That's right. There it was accepted. Anyhow, Rav Herzog didn't break the kelim. He didn't turn tables because that was his personality, and he thought that in the end it's better to have unity than to have my way. And with that, in 1958 he got Pras Israel. And a year later, in 1959, he was niftar. and was buried. He was very much liked, but on that area, his legacy didn't really, was not really continued. Because, as I said, it was seen by the right, it was seen as not authentic enough. By the left, it was seen as too Jewish. And so there was no real continuation. His children did continue in his way, but unfortunately, his son, Rav Yaakov Herzog, was a consular of Israel in Canada, in Washington. He was a genius, was also a rabbi, but he was niftar in a very young age of 51. The son, by the way, of Rav Yaakov Herzog, is called Chaim Herzog, became a military man, a politician, and also the sixth president of the Jewish state. And the son of Chaim Herzog, so the great grandson of Rav Herzog, is Yitzchak Herzog, called after him, who is the current president of Madinas Israel. So the family is a very strong and respected family to this day, but some of his legacy is still waiting to be redeemed. And that's the story of Rav Yitzchak Aייזיק Halevi Herzog, and Bezrat Hashem, we would meet next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.